Hey guys! Tonight we start with something more enveloping than a warm blanket. Imagine stepping into a town where every breath tastes of wool smoke and dread. You're here in a dimly lit square, cobblestones slick with early spring rain, and a hush has fallen over empty marketplaces where vendors once hawked cheese and linen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you settle in, feel free to post your location local time in the chat. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand beneath a ragged canopy of banners. Once bright with heraldry, now sagging under droplets of mist. Wool smoke curls around your ankles, drifting from chimneys that line narrow lanes, each hearth burning both business and fear. You inhale the acrid scent, a mix of soot and damp straw, and for a moment you wonder if the air itself is contagious. Historians still argue whether those early palls of miasma truly carried the plague or simply signaled human desperation, but in this moment, as you press fingertips to trembling lips, it all feels ominously real. The marketplace stalls sit vacant, their wooden awnings sagging toward rotten hay. You notice a lone potter's wheel, idle and coated in gray dust, and a dozen overturned baskets tangled with cobwebs. A ragged cat slinks through the debris, tail low, its yellow eyes glaring at you as if daring you to stay. Wooden signs swing on rusted hinges, the carved symbols almost indecipherable. Perhaps they once warned no dogs or fresh catch here. Now they serve only as silent sentinels to a town paused in mid-breath. You hear your own heartbeat echo inside your chest as you press on, guided by the staccato drip of water from leaky gutters. Each street you take seems tighter, walls leaning, shutters trembling. A thick haze drapes the skyline, blotting out the church spires that would normally point you towards sanctuary. Instead, you feel swallowed by a gray cloak of uncertainty. Lanterns hang like watchful eyes, their faint glow flickering against the smoke, casting long shadows that stretch and yawn across the cobbles. Your boots click-clack in rhythm with a distant bell toll, perhaps noon, or perhaps another announcement of death. You can't tell if the bell marks time or tragedy. The toll resonates deep in your bones. And for a heartbeat you believe the very earth is sighing. You steel yourself as you pass a shuttered apothecary window, its glass cracked, revealing half-empty jars labeled rosemary, myrrh, and mummy powder. You might have come seeking comfort in herbal lore, but the sight only reminds you of remedies too late. Further along, a string of wooden crosses leans against a low fence, each one small and roughly hewn. They bear simple inscriptions: Jeanette, died April 10th, Marceau, died April 11th, unknown infant. The names bleed into one another like fresh wounds. You reach out but stop short, respecting the boundary between life and the earth that now claims so many lives. A cold breeze rises, tugging at your hair, whispering through the empty archways of what was once a bustling guild hall. As you continue, you notice footsteps that aren't yours, soft, distant, unhurried. You turn, heart thundering, and see a figure in a wide-brimmed hat and long cloak, face hidden. They glide past with deliberate calm, an eerie contrast to the chaos in your mind. You imagine clothed in crude leather or felt, that they might be one of the plague doctors, but without the beaked mask. Instead, this person carries a wooden staff topped with a lantern whose light seems to shimmer with an otherworldly patience. You follow at a careful distance, boots muffled by moss that carpets the narrow alley. The figure stops at a low doorway, lifts the lantern high, and peers inside. You catch a glimpse of rags on a straw pallet. A tangle of limbs silent beneath stained sheets. The doctor tilts the lantern so a ray of light brushes the patient's face, then lowers it again, as if in prayer. There's a tenderness to the gesture that belies the brutality of the plague's toll. At that moment, you sense the town holding its breath, waiting. You realize that each shuttered window, each idle wheel, each list of names on a crude cross amounts to a collective gasp against the tide of sickness. You stand quietly, feeling strangely awake in the heart of this medieval stillness. The wool smoke swirls, the bell tolls again, softer now, as if in reverence. And you, breathing in that heavy, haunted air, prepare to step further into a world unmade by disease yet held together by the fragile thread of human resilience. You continue down the narrowing alleyways, past crooked doorframes and windows shuttered with rough-hewn planks. The townspeople have vanished, but you can still feel them, the press of lives that once spilled out of these doors, the chatter, the bartering, the clatter of hooves over cobblestone. Now, the only sound is the faint creaking of wooden beams under the weight of time and silence. You pass under a stone archway that might once have welcomed travelers to this town. The words engraved above are worn and moss-softened, barely legible. Your hand trails along the damp stone as you enter what feels like the heart of this place, a square with a dry fountain in the center, the sculpture atop it chipped. Its angel's face missing. A black cloth flaps from the window of the town hall. Not a banner, not a signal. Just a strip of cloth, draped in resignation. It's here you start to see how mortality reshaped daily life. This town, like many others across medieval Europe, was once filled with the regular rhythms of community, the chiming bells for mass, the clang of blacksmiths, the chatter of market women haggling over onions. But now, those rhythms are fractured, scattered like broken pottery. You pass the bakery, its ovens cold, the scent of yeast long gone. A wooden paddle leans against the soot-covered wall. Flour sacks lie open, their contents spoiled by damp. In a corner, a cat curls on a pile of rags. Too weak to flinch at your presence. You kneel and stroke its fur, brittle and warm beneath your fingertips. In this moment, even this tiny, living body feels like a miracle. You step over a threshold into a home where the door hangs open. Inside, the hearth is dark, ashes long cold. A child's toy, a wooden horse, sits abandoned beside an overturned stool. You imagine a life interrupted mid-play, laughter turned to coughing, curiosity to confusion. You can almost hear a mother's hurried footsteps, the door slammed shut in fear, and the endless waiting behind it. Through the rear window, you glimpse a garden overgrown and wild, herbs now tangled in brambles. Rosemary, lavender, marjoram, all once cultivated for food and medicine, now struggle through the weeds. Bees hover still, uncertain, and a single apple has dropped from a tree, left to rot in silence. And yet, even amid this devastation, there are signs of human instinct, tiny, stubborn acts of survival. On one door, someone has carved a cross with a blade. On another, a charcoal-drawn circle, maybe a charm, maybe a warning. You find sprigs of dried herbs hung above several doorways, tied with string, little bundles of belief and hope. You begin to notice patterns in this seemingly deserted town. Certain homes are marked with chalk, 3 diagonal lines, repeated again and again. Perhaps they once indicated infection, or death, or absence. No one truly knows anymore. The language of survival, like the people who spoke it, is fading into silence. As you continue wandering, your eye catches movement again, this time a curtain fluttering in an upstairs window. You pause, heartbeat quickening. Was it wind? Or someone still within? You linger, watching, but no face appears. The curtain sways once more, then falls still. Mortality here is not theatrical. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets or lightning. It simply accumulates. One empty cradle. One burned letter. One forgotten prayer whispered behind a locked door. You pass a church whose heavy doors are ajar, revealing pews coated in dust. The altar cloth is folded back, the candles burned to their nubs. A single prayer book lies open, its pages softened by humidity. You reach out and turn a page gently, surprised that the spine still holds. The town's silence becomes part of your breath. The absence, your companion. And yet, people did survive. They clung to life in cramped cottages, shared soup when they could, whispered stories to frighten children, and sang hymns behind closed shutters. Not everyone fell. For every home that lies empty, there were others where families emerged weeks later, blinking into the sunlight, ragged but breathing. They would have stepped out slowly, warily, glancing at each other as if to confirm they were still real. You imagine yourself among them. Your hands blistered from tending a garden alone. Your voice hoarse from praying without reply. Your eyes squinting in disbelief at a sunrise you thought you'd never see again. In the distance, the town bell rings again, this time not a knell, but a summons. You turn your head and see smoke rising gently from one chimney. A signal, perhaps. Or just a fire rekindled by one of the few who endured. You walk toward it, past the dry fountain, past the broken signs, past a street strewn with windblown leaves. Mortality has swept through like a tide, but what remains? Your footprints, your breath, the faint echo of laughter, reminds you that even in the shadow of the Black Death, life found ways to whisper back. You follow the narrow lane, your boots echoing in gentle rhythm with the quiet hush of wind weaving between walls. The air here feels heavier, tinged with a peculiar sharpness that isn't quite rot and not quite dust, more like a room left closed too long, sealed with fear and damp breath. You step cautiously, turning corners as the town unfolds in small, sleepy fragments. In the stillness, superstition clings to the buildings like ivy. Here, in the folds of thatched roofs and crooked shutters, medieval minds sought answers to what they could not see. It wasn't just death that unsettled them, it was not knowing. Why one family fell and another did not. Why the baker's boy survived. But the wealthy merchant's household vanished overnight. In the absence of certainty, imagination filled the gaps with fevered theories. You pass a group of small charms dangling from a door latch, tiny straw dolls, bones of birds, bits of colored glass. You reach out and touch one gently. It swings like a pendulum before settling. These are apotropaic tokens, meant to ward off evil, sickness, or misfortune. They seem both sweetly naive and heartbreakingly hopeful. And in this place, they're everywhere. Tucked into doorframes, woven into thatch, hidden beneath window ledges, the whispers that float through the town tell you that people didn't understand contagion the way you do. They feared not bacteria, but bad air, a miasma, thick and toxic, wafting in from the marshes or drifting from the breath of the sick. So they lit fires of fragrant herbs, sweet woods, and resin to cleanse the atmosphere. You pass one such pile of ash beneath a wall vent. A few charred sprigs of rosemary and dried sage still smolder faintly, as if the town itself is still trying to exhale. You round a corner and find a larger square. At its center stands a raised wooden platform where town criers once read royal decrees. It now serves a very different purpose. Someone has set out bowls of vinegar and garlic, each sitting alone like sentries guarding the empty square. You breathe in the acrid tang and wrinkle your nose, imagining villagers carefully arranging these offerings against invisible forces. You glance up and see a cloth bundle nailed above a doorframe. It's stuffed with camphor and rose petals, tied with string, and painted with a symbol you don't recognize. Maybe it's a family crest. Maybe it's just a prayer in pictorial form. People grasped what they could, symbols, scents, songs, and layered their homes with meaning in hopes it might shield them. A little farther down the lane, you hear the trickle of water and follow it. A fountain, still running. Perhaps fed by a spring. Around it, someone has laid polished stones in a spiral. It could be a pattern meant to confuse evil spirits, at least, that was the thinking in some places. They believed misfortune couldn't travel in curves. Spirits got lost in spirals, trapped in mirrored halls and tangled patterns. You can't help but smile softly at the thought of death itself getting dizzy, stalled by a simple trick of geometry. On a nearby wall, faint charcoal drawings catch your eye, figures dancing. Arms linked, surrounded by animals. One of the figures holds a flower to their nose. The others wear wide-brimmed hats. Perhaps a family, or maybe a dream someone drew to keep fear at bay. You can almost imagine them doing it by candlelight, whispering stories to each other as they sketched in secret. Children, especially, were protected with ritual and rhyme. You pause beside a nursery window and hum a melody that seems to hang in the air, though no voice sings it now. Ring-a-ring of roses, a pocket full of posies. That rhyme, born centuries later, may not be accurate to this exact time, but the sentiment, using song to soften terror, spans all ages. Even the clothing worn in these plague-shadowed towns took on talismanic meaning. You find a half-open chest inside a cottage and kneel to peek inside. Among the folded wool and linen are small stitched crosses, herbs sewn into hems, tiny pouches of salt. Clothing was armor, against cold, spirits, and uncertainty. You run your fingers over the faded embroidery. Still soft despite time, outside again, you come across a shuttered inn. Its sign still swings, reading the blessed cock. The name draws a sleepy smile from you. Perhaps once this was a place of laughter, song, spilled ale, and clattering wooden mugs. Now it stands silent, its door braced shut with a bar. A faded parchment flutters nearby, pinned to the wall. You lean in. A list of names, possibly those who stayed here, or those lost to the fever. It occurs to you how information traveled in strange, stuttering ways. With no newspapers, news came through travelers, word of mouth, friars, or town criers shouting from church steps. Fear spread faster than truth. The wind might carry rumors of poisoned wells, of witches, of the stars aligning for ruin. And in this state of not knowing, the mind filled in the blanks with a patchwork of magic, folklore, and whispered warnings passed from elder to child, you turn your eyes upward and imagine a night sky above this town, brighter than any modern sky, the stars untouched by electric glow. Back then, the stars were guides, calendars, and messengers. A comet could mean catastrophe. A blood moon, a divine omen. Many townspeople likely lay awake at night, eyes wide to the heavens, trying to decipher what might come next. You reach a small chapel at the edge of the lane. The door creaks open when you push it. Inside, wax still pools at the base of a candle. Someone has drawn protective circles around the altar with ash. Above it, an image of Saint Sebastian pierced with arrows looks down with the same calm expression he always has. You step inside and sit for a moment, letting the hush settle over you. You imagine a mother kneeling here not long ago, clutching her child's blanket and asking the saints for mercy. In this world of half-belief and half-dread, superstition is not a sign of ignorance. It's a form of resilience. A way to stay grounded when everything else, the earth, the air, the very rules of life, seems to unravel. You stand once more, brush dust from your knees, and step back into the lane. You walk onward, surrounded by silence, symbols, and the enduring ache of belief. The next lane you take is narrower still, its cobbles more uneven, and the air here somehow feels closer, thicker, as though the past itself is breathing softly against your skin. You slow your steps, not out of fear, but from the strange reverence that settles when you know you're about to step inside someone's daily life. Long after they've gone, you arrive at a small square where laundry once fluttered between houses. Wooden poles lean askew now, and the lines have long since rotted away. But you imagine it, bright tunics, hand-washed shifts, steaming linen in the morning sun. A place where daily life unfolded in all its domestic clatter. where people bickered and laughed, tended to goats. Mended boots, stirred pots over open flames. Inside one doorway, you find a kitchen still mostly intact. A cauldron hangs above a stone hearth. A flat loaf of bread, petrified by time, sits uneaten beside a cracked jug. The walls are stained with years of cooking smoke, and dried herbs still hang from a crossbeam overhead, yarrow, bay, thyme, now crumbling to the touch. You rest a hand on the wooden table. Smooth in the center from use, worn down by countless elbows and bowls and prayerful hands, you take a seat on a small stool and let your eyes wander. Here was a family's heartbeat. Maybe 5 or 6 people slept in one room, under fur pelts, their feet tangled for warmth. Children tucked in corners, snoring in staggered rhythms. Parents whispering in the dark about missing coins or harvests gone bad. And yet, they woke each morning and did it all again. Boiled oats, chopped turnips, milked the goat. Survival was mundane before it became miraculous. You walk through a curtain and find a crude sleeping space. A straw mattress, indented. A wooden box used as a cradle. And there, beside it, a carved comb and a pair of slippers, each one a little different, suggesting they were made in haste or with worn tools. It's quiet here, but the silence is full of small sounds. A baby's fussing. A spoon tapping against a clay bowl. A dog thudding its tail on the floor when someone finally comes home. This was survival in its smallest, softest form. Not heroics. Just chores. The repetition of days in the face of unknowable dread, and outside the door, the communal rhythm continued. The town oven, for instance, a stone dome at the end of the alley. Every week, families brought dough wrapped in cloth, marked their loaves with unique cuts or stamps, and left them in the care of a single baker. You see faint initials carved into a bench beside it, little monograms of pride. It wasn't just bread. It was a kind of fragile trust, that food would be returned, still warm, still theirs. Next to the oven, you find a watering trough. Not for horses, but for soaking linen. Wash days were whole town affairs. Women bent over barrels, scrubbing and gossiping, slapping cloth against stones. You can almost hear it, the wet thuds, the laughter, the sighs of aching backs. Laundry was hard, endless work, but it was also where news traveled. Who had a new baby? Who hadn't been seen since Wednesday? Who was coughing now? A dog trots past, lean and unbothered, startling you out of your daydream. Its collar is braided from reeds, probably made by a child who missed their pet. It pauses, sniffs the air, then trots off again, tail swaying with its own strange confidence. You follow it and end up at a coop, where a single chicken still clucks, stubbornly alive. The coop is a sagging thing, patched with mismatched wood, and half the fence has fallen. But there she is, this lone hen. Her feathers are ragged, but she still struts. You squat and offer your hand. She eyes you warily, then pecks at the dirt. The resilience of a bird. That's survival. Too, back inside another home, you find evidence of a trade. A spinning wheel. Flax bundles. A drop spindle left mid-use, the thread still stretched taut between hand and hope. This was someone's craft. Their livelihood. Their distraction, maybe, from thoughts they didn't want to think. You run your fingers along the wheel's rim. Smooth as river stone, from years of spinning stories into thread, not far from there is a smithy. The forge has long since cooled, but tools still hang in careful rows. Hammers. Tongs. A half-finished horseshoe left on the anvil. You can almost see the smith, broad-shouldered, patient, wiping sweat from his brow and adjusting his apron. Maybe he was the last one in town to fall ill. Maybe he made the nails that sealed up infected houses. Or maybe he kept fixing things long after there was no one left to use them. Your mind turns again to the small kindnesses people offered each other. Shared loaves. A rush mat left at a neighbor's door. Goat's milk for the widow down the lane. Even a nod of acknowledgement across the square. Small, steady rituals that reminded people they weren't entirely alone. And then there were the children. You find signs of them everywhere. Carvings on a post, a game board etched into a floor tile, a ball made from cloth scraps. They made up stories, played pretend, built forts from firewood, and ran barefoot through mud, laughter echoing like bells. Children are always the last to surrender to fear. And in their play, adults found reasons to smile. Even here, even now, you feel it. You duck into one last house before the day fades completely. This one feels almost lived in. A table has been set with 3 plates, mismatched and chipped. A clay jug stands full of rainwater. Someone's scarf hangs over the back of a chair. You imagine they've only just stepped out. That they'll be back any moment to light the fire, stir the pot, and complain about the turnips again. Survival, you realize, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as setting the table anyway. As stubborn as feeding the hen. As strange and lovely as tying a bundle of herbs to the door even when you're not sure it helps. You linger a moment longer, then step outside, letting the breeze carry you forward. Your steps carry you toward the edge of town now, where the walls give way to the open fields beyond, and the horizon stretches a little wider. The wind picks up slightly here, cooler, cleaner, and you realize it's because you're close to the burial grounds. The earth feels different beneath your feet, softer, looser, disturbed and resettled many times over, and here, among the sloping mounds and sunken earth, medieval people faced their most difficult task, burying their dead while still trying to live. You pause beside a wooden cart with one splintered wheel. Bits of cloth cling to its edges, and a faint scent of lavender still lingers in the wood, like a kindness someone tried to offer. Death came quickly for many, but not so quickly that families didn't try to prepare. Clean the body. Lay out the limbs. Place a sprig of rosemary or coins for the journey, if they could spare them. You move slowly now, as if your body knows this is a place for hushed tones and careful steps. The graves here aren't neatly marked. A few have stones with worn carvings. Some have wood, half buried, tilted. Others are simply grassed over and left to time. Historians still argue whether plague pits were always the unceremonious mass graves we imagine. In cities, yes, people were buried in haste, wrapped in cloth, lowered by men paid in bread or beer. But in smaller towns, like this one, burial retained some of its rituals, even at the height of despair. When someone died, the community noticed. They came, even if just a nod from a distance. You find one grave ringed with stones and a small clay doll resting at its center. Perhaps a child's grave. Perhaps placed there by a sister or brother who didn't yet understand the permanence of absence. You crouch beside it and trace the ridges of the doll with your thumb, imagining the love tucked into that one tiny gesture. Nearby, a shallow trench lined with bones tells a different story. Not unkind, just overwhelmed. When too many died at once, careful burial gave way to necessity. Bodies were wrapped in sheets, laid shoulder to shoulder, and covered in quicklime to speed decomposition and mask the smell. The work was exhausting, thankless. But someone had to do it. You imagine the grave diggers. Often men who had already survived one wave of the plague and were assumed immune, or, more likely, were simply desperate. They dug, hauled, wrapped, lowered, and said brief prayers when no one else could bear to. You can almost hear the rhythm of their shovels in the earth, their soft murmuring to themselves. their worn hands tightening around splintered handles as they tried not to breathe too deeply. You come across a small wooden cross planted beside a sunken patch of ground. Scratched into the wood, the name Alan. Just that. No dates. No flourish. Just a name, holding fast to memory, and memory was precious here. People passed stories of their loved ones by word of mouth. They whispered them at night while stirring porridge, or when braiding hair. She loved the smell of mint, they'd say. He could sing louder than the bell tower. Little things. True things. Stories that kept the departed just a few steps away. Back along the path, a collapsed stone wall reveals something unexpected, a small altar. Tucked into the roots of a leaning oak. Weather-worn, but clearly tended once. A place where people lit candles or left tokens. Buttons. Bits of ribbon. A smooth pebble. Here, death was not always feared, it was met with quiet reverence, folded into life like the end of a prayer. You sit beneath the oak for a while, letting the stillness take hold. A crow caws in the distance. The grass stirs like breath. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls once, then is silent. The dead did not vanish here. They were part of everything. Their absence hung in doorways, rested in folded linens, and drifted in the scent of ash. You continue onward, noticing now the careful routes people took to separate the sick from the well. The infected were often isolated, sometimes willingly, sometimes by force. If a family fell ill, their home might be marked with paint or a sign, and others would leave food at the threshold without knocking. Some towns created plague houses on the outskirts. Rudimentary shelters where the sick could go, tended to by clergy or brave volunteers, and some, sadly, were abandoned. Left in rooms with shuttered windows, beds lined with straw, and no one left to tend them. You reach one such building, its door ajar, as though still waiting for someone to come back. Inside, a cot lies empty. A jug of water tipped on its side. And on the table, a wooden bowl with 2 spoons. Someone hoped for company. Still, not all acts were shaped by fear. You find evidence of quiet defiance, letters scratched onto wood, hidden notes beneath floorboards. Names joined together. Marie loves Johann. These were acts of hope. Of stubborn joy, in spite of death. You smile faintly, running a finger along one of the carvings. Love, still etched into the bones of a dying town. Outside, a hawthorn tree grows near the edge of the burial ground, its white blossoms just beginning to bloom. In folklore, hawthorn was a tree of both death and rebirth. Its blossoms were never brought inside, it was bad luck, but here, left to grow wild, it feels like a kind of forgiveness. You sit in its shade and let your eyes close for a moment. Just long enough to imagine what this place might have sounded like when it was full of life. Not just coughing and sorrow, but chatter, footsteps, songs carried by wind, the hiss of something cooking over coals. The dead were mourned in countless ways. Bells rang. Candles were lit. Families walked in silence behind simple carts. But perhaps the most enduring ritual was this, remembering. Not in cathedrals or chronicles, but in daily habits. In passing on a recipe. In using the same lullaby. In planting herbs in the same cracked pot. You open your eyes again, slowly, and rise. The burial ground is behind you now, but its hush lingers in your steps. Not heavy. Just present. You carry it with you as the lane winds back toward the center of town, where others still live, still stir, still hope. The sun is beginning to tilt now, casting long, honey-colored beams across the crooked rooftops and catching in the damp patches along the cobblestones. You follow the light back toward the heart of town, where the rhythm of daily survival beat on, shaky but stubborn, your feet guide you to the marketplace, or what's left of it. There's no clamor here anymore, but you can still feel the ghost of a crowd. The low murmur of bartering, the crack of a wheel over stone, the clink of coins being reluctantly handed over. The plague may have emptied the stalls, but for a time, even amid fear, trade limped forward. A crumpled awning still dangles from one vendor's booth. Beneath it lie shriveled remnants of things that were once edible, onions, maybe, or apples too soft to keep. A woven basket sits abandoned, half filled with wilted greens. Food scarcity was real. When fields went untended, livestock died, and workers fell ill, prices soared and diets shrank. You might have eaten pottage every day, a simple, watery stew of oats, cabbage, turnips, whatever was left. Familiar. Filling. Forgettable. You pass a stall that once sold spices. Its little drawers are still labeled in spidery Latin: Piper nigrum, cinnamomum, salvia. A few cloves remain in one jar, hardened like pebbles. In plague times, people believed certain smells could ward off death. Spices, flowers, vinegar-soaked cloths. You try to imagine the townsfolk walking around with oranges studded with cloves. Sweet and sharp against the foul air, a little farther on, you come across a baker's cart, its wheels sunken into the dirt. A wooden paddle leans against it, and behind it, blessedly, almost comically, you find the fossil of a loaf. A hard, perfectly round piece of rye bread, looking more like a stone than a meal. Still, it's proof of someone's routine. Bread was more than food. It was consistency, warmth, maybe even hope. People didn't stop baking, not completely. They just did it more quietly. You wander over to what used to be a butcher's stall. Nothing remains now but bones, animal bones, scattered, clean. A rusted hook swings gently in the breeze, and you instinctively duck your head as if it might catch your ear. Here's where people once haggled over scraps. When meat was scarce, even gristle became precious. Offal was cooked into pies, tongues were boiled, nothing wasted. You picture a tired woman arguing fiercely for a pig's foot, holding her coin out like a sword. Somewhere nearby, you hear chickens clucking, survivors, again. One pecks at the edge of a broken crate. It flutters slightly as you approach, then settles again. Livestock was valuable beyond measure: milk, eggs, warmth, even manure for fuel. Families kept goats in their kitchens, hens on the stairs. Any wall might have doubled as a pen. Then there's the apothecary's corner. You find the remains of a wooden counter and rows of tiny glass bottles, some still holding faint powders, chalky white, rust red, mossy green. A mortar and pestle sit waiting, patient. The labels are mostly gone, but a few symbols remain, tiny drawings of plants, suns, stars. The medieval pharmacist's cabinet wasn't always effective, but it was born of desperation and hope. Sage for cleansing. Pennyroyal for fevers. Crushed emeralds if you had the money, and the optimism. You step around the edge of the square and find a fountain. Dry now. Moss traces a fuzzy green crown along its rim, and a carved face, maybe a lion, maybe just a badly sculpted man, spouts nothing but dust. Once, this was where people came to draw water, rinse vegetables, let children splash their feet in summer. It wasn't clean by our standards, but it was what they had. And sometimes, the water just stopped. Wells ran dry. Springs were tainted. People prayed and drank anyway. A little off to the side, you stumble across a scattered pile of clothing, stiff with time and half buried in mud. A sleeve with delicate embroidery. A child's cap. Someone must have died here. Or maybe someone fled and left it behind. Either way, the clothing feels intimate, too intimate. You step carefully past it, giving it the respect it still seems to ask for. At the far end of the market, you reach the tannery, easily the worst-smelling corner of town when it was alive. Even now, there's a sour tang in the air, like old leather and damp fur. Tanning was vital. Leather for shoes, belts, flasks. But the process was, let's say, unpleasant. Animal hides soaked in urine or pigeon droppings. Scraped clean, then hung to dry in long rows that fluttered like ghostly sails. Tanners were often pushed to the edge of town, less for their health and more for everyone else's noses. Here, beside the tannery wall, you find a pair of boots. Small. Worn. Carefully stitched. Someone made them with love, or at least with skill. Maybe they walked through this very square in them. Maybe they stopped here to trade one for a hunk of cheese, or to chase a friend in circles until they collapsed in laughter. Because yes, even then, even when fear was thick in the air, people still laughed. They still told jokes, played pranks, rolled dice. You notice a small pouch left behind near a post. Inside, 5 simple game pieces and a carved die. The edges are worn. Someone used this often, likely betting small coins or nuts. Gambling wasn't just distraction, it was a ritual, a sliver of control in an uncontrollable world. There's even a makeshift puppet theater, just a wooden box with faded painted figures and a curtain made from what looks like an old apron. Traveling entertainers were rare during outbreaks, but townsfolk found their own ways to tell stories. Someone might have stood here, ducking behind the box, giving voice to kings and fools, to make children laugh while parents leaned in just a little closer, grateful for the break in tension. As you linger in this strange, half-silent market, the wind carries scents long gone. Onion. Sweat. Soot. Dried herbs crushed underfoot. The smell of survival, humble and human. This was no place of grandeur. It was mud and barter and scraped knees. But it was alive. Wildly and messily alive. You turn toward the narrow lane leading away from the square, already missing its ghosts. The marketplace was never about the goods, not really. It was about presence. About neighbors elbowing each other with mock annoyance. About someone calling your name across a crowd. About the knowledge that, even in sickness, you could still be seen, still be part of something. You carry that feeling with you now, the soft imprint of shared space, as your feet led you deeper into the fading light. The lane narrows again, winding like a ribbon through the cluster of cottages that make up the residential heart of this little plague-struck town. Here, things feel more intimate. The air is thicker with chimney smoke and old stew, and the walls seem to lean toward you slightly, as if curious who you are and where you've been. You step over a broken bucket lying outside a doorway. Its wooden slats are warped from rain, its iron band rusted and curled at one end. Someone dropped it in haste, or perhaps set it down one day and never picked it back up. Little remnants like these are the fingerprints of daily life. You imagine its last use, drawing water, feeding a pig, maybe even washing a child who wouldn't sit still. Inside the homes, survival looked different from the market's rough exchange. It was quieter, more personal. You peek through a half-open door and see a single-room dwelling, walls lined with dried herbs, beds crammed into corners, and a central hearth where ash still clings to the bricks like memory. Everything here is worn but cared for. The kind of worn that comes from necessity, not neglect. A clay pot sits on the hearthstone, its lid slightly askew. You lift it and sniff. A hint of thyme and something more pungent, wild garlic, maybe. Pottage again, or a healing broth. People used what they had, blending cooking and medicine with the same ladle. Onion for strength. Honey for sore throats. Wine, when they had it, for nearly everything else. Overhead, bunches of drying herbs hang from beams, yarrow, sage, feverfew. Some are bundled with ribbon or twine, little tokens of care in a world that didn't always offer it. You touch one gently, releasing a whisper of scent into the air. And there, beside the hearth, lies a shoe. Just one. Tiny. Soft leather with a strip of wool inside for comfort. The child it belonged to is long gone, but the shoe remains, tucked as if waiting to be found, waiting to be needed again. Daily life wasn't about thriving, it was about not vanishing. You move into the room as though it's still inhabited, careful not to bump the table, not to stir the dust in its settled sleep. A spindle leans against a chair, still threaded. Someone was spinning wool, maybe for warmth, maybe to trade. Time was measured in chores, and progress came stitch by stitch. At the back of the room, a ladder leads to a sleeping loft, little more than planks and straw. You climb halfway up, then pause, looking out across the room. You imagine it at night, with a fire glowing low and children tucked under blankets made from old tunics. The mother might be humming. The father counting out the day's coins. Maybe not enough. Maybe just barely. Outside, the rhythm continues. A woman tends her window box garden, a few onions poking up through the soil, a limp rosemary bush. She plucks a leaf and crushes it in her fingers before tucking it behind her ear. A ward, maybe. Or just a habit that reminds her she's still here. Next door, someone is mending. The scrape of a needle through cloth is faint but rhythmic, like a metronome of hope. Patching the same tunic again and again. Turning it inside out when the seams give way. People didn't throw things out. They transformed them. Cloaks became tunics, tunics became rags, rags became diapers or bandages or fire starters. You pause by a window where light streams through a pattern of thick glass panes. On the sill, someone has arranged small objects with great care, a polished stone, a twist of wool, a figurine carved from bone. Charms, perhaps. Or keepsakes. Little things that made the day feel less empty. Every home had its own routines. Morning meant clearing ash, fetching water, checking for fever. Children helped where they could, if they were old enough and still healthy. Sometimes that meant grinding grain, sometimes it meant watching the goat or simply staying out of the way. You step into another home, this one darker. The fire is out. A chair is overturned, a table bare. The smell is wrong, still, sour. It feels abandoned in a hurry. You don't stay long. Even ghosts, it seems, have boundaries. Back outside, someone is baking. The smell of yeast and smoke curls down the street like a ribbon. You follow it to a larger house. Maybe a weaver or a merchant once lived here. The bread is being pulled from a clay oven by an older woman. Her sleeves rolled and her face lined. She sees you, or someone like you, and smiles faintly without speaking. She turns back to her task, brushing flour from the wooden paddle, and there it is again, that quiet defiance. That insistence on doing the next thing. Kneading dough, patching cloaks, feeding chickens, whispering prayers. You walk past her house and let the scent follow you for as long as it lasts. At the next bend, you find a crude toy wagon tipped in the dirt. The wheels still turn if you nudge it. Children were not immune to the plague, but when they were spared, they still played. Still argued. Still giggled. You remember that puppet theater, and it fits now, entertainment in small doses. Carried in pockets or made from scraps, even bedtime had its place. Families lay down together, often in shared beds, sometimes across mats by the fire. If one child coughed, everyone stirred. If one had nightmares, they all woke. Sleep was communal. Light sleepers were guardians. Heavy sleepers were blessings. And there it is again, that quiet defiance. That insistence on doing the next thing. Kneading dough, patching cloaks, feeding chickens, whispering prayers. You walk past her house and let the scent follow you for as long as it lasts. At the next bend, you find a crude toy wagon tipped in the dirt. The wheels still turn if you nudge it. Children were not immune to the plague, but when they were spared, they still played. Still argued. Still giggled. You remember that puppet theater, and it fits now, entertainment in small doses, carried in pockets or made from scraps. Even bedtime had its place. Families lay down together, often in shared beds, sometimes across mats by the fire. If one child coughed, everyone stirred. If one had nightmares, they all woke. Sleep was communal. Light sleepers were guardians. Heavy sleepers were blessings. At the edge of this neighborhood, you come across a wall with chalk markings. Tally marks. Symbols. A crude drawing of a star. Perhaps children used it as a game. Perhaps someone tracked the days here, scratching one line per sunrise. In a world where calendars faltered, this too was a kind of order, and then, just before the next turn, you find a cat. Thin, gray, watching you from the top of a barrel. It blinks slowly, then yawns, unbothered. Cats thrived in plague years, hunting the rats that carried fleas, indifferent to human suffering. You tip your head to it, and it, with feline authority, ignores you entirely. You take one last glance down the row of homes, now lit gold by the fading light. These were not grand lives, but they were full ones, stitched together by meals, chores, laughter, grief. No one planned for plague. But they adapted, one awkward day at a time. You step away with a fuller sense of what it meant to live not just through history, but within it. Quiet, stubborn, deeply human. The sun begins to dip just a little lower, casting long shadows that stretch across the cobbled path ahead of you. The world seems quieter now, as if the town is holding its breath, watching to see whether night will come gently, or with a chill. You follow the sound of trickling water and soon find yourself at the edge of a modest garden. Not an ornamental one, no rose hedges or sculpted herbs here. This is a working plot, tucked behind a friary, its soil turned by calloused hands, its rows uneven but full of promise. You pause at the low wooden gate and let your eyes scan the patches of green and brown, cabbages heavy with dew, leeks standing like proud little soldiers, and rows of medicinal herbs clumped along the borders like sentinels. Monasteries were more than houses of prayer during the plague years. They became lifelines, repositories of knowledge, and ironically, often the centers of disease. But here, in this garden, the balance leaned toward healing. A friar, stooped and steady, tends the earth with a worn trowel. He hums to himself, a simple tune with no clear melody, just enough to keep the crows in silence at bay. You can almost feel the rhythm of his day: wake before dawn, prayer, a handful of oats, then hours among the soil and parchment. Behind him, the friary building rises, stone, thick-walled, and surprisingly warm-looking in the late light. You notice the bee boxes lined up neatly against the far side. Bees moving in slow, lazy loops above them. Honey was precious. Not just sweet, but sacred. Used to soothe wounds, to seal bandages, to sweeten bitter remedies or desperate tea. You step through the gate, and the friar does not look up. He knows you mean no harm. Or maybe he's seen enough visitors pass through these gardens, tangible or otherwise, that he no longer startles easily. He moves toward the herb bed, and you follow. Valerian, mint, wormwood. Plants with histories of their own. Some were used in plague treatments, boiled in broths or crushed into poultices. Others simply served to mask the stench of illness, death, and whatever else lingered too long in the lungs. He plucks a stem of horehound and holds it to his nose. Then, delicately, he places it on a nearby tray. You notice more trays now, laid out on a flat stone, a careful arrangement of dried leaves and roots. This isn't guesswork, it's memory, written in scent and texture and tradition. You move inside the friary, through a heavy wooden door that creaks like it's exhaling centuries. The corridor is lined with old manuscripts and candle stubs. Their wax pooled like forgotten thoughts. The walls smell of old ink and dried herbs and something fainter still, maybe hope, maybe mildew. In a small room, another monk prepares tinctures. You watch as he crushes herbs in a mortar, his hands slow but certain. He adds wine to the mix, then pours the slurry into a bottle stoppered with cloth. Labels are rare. He knows what each bottle does by feel, by the color of the liquid, by its sharp or mellow scent. This monk, younger than the one outside, mutters something under his breath. A prayer or a formula, it's hard to tell. He glances up, not at you, but at the tiny crucifix on the wall. For monks, healing was part duty, part worship. Tending to the body was a way of honoring the soul's vessel, though, during the plague, the line between body and soul often blurred quickly. Nearby, a wax tablet rests beside a quill, notes scratched in Latin and shorthand. You lean in. The words speak of doses, symptoms, and outcomes, who lived, who didn't. The records aren't morbid. They're matter-of-fact, methodical. A kind of scientific reverence, centuries before the microscope. You walk through the cloister garden now, where the stone path curves around a central fountain. The water is clean, or cleaner than most. Birds hop along the edge, and you watch as one dips its beak, then ruffles its feathers with sleepy contentment. The monks have hung bells along the cloister's wooden beams. They chime when the wind stirs, a gentle reminder to pray, to breathe, to pause. A novice passes by, robes too long for his thin frame. He carries a basket of dried lavender and marjoram, likely destined for the infirmary. You follow his path across the cloister and down a corridor where the air grows warmer, sharper, tinged with vinegar and dried sage. The infirmary is plain but orderly. Wooden beds lined in a row, each with a small table, a ceramic basin, and a roughly sewn curtain that offers more gesture than privacy. This is where the sick came, if they could still walk, or if someone brought them. Not everyone was turned away. The monks risked infection daily. Many paid for that kindness with their lives. You pause at a bed where the sheets are still ruffled from someone who once lay there. A book sits beside the pillow, its leather cracked, pages stained with fingers and time. Perhaps it was a comfort. Or perhaps it was merely the last possession of someone who once believed the worst was over. A cup of mead sits untouched beside it. Still sweet, still warm. Maybe it was poured in hope. Maybe it's been sitting far longer than it should. Historians still argue whether the monastic remedies were more effective than the chaos of city doctors. Some say yes, the monks had order, access to herbs, a cleaner environment. Others argue the opposite, that isolation and rudimentary tools sealed many fates. But here, in the hush of this stone infirmary, you feel that the truth may lie somewhere between, a mixture of care and limitation, devotion and despair. You trace your fingers across the cool stone windowsill and glance outside. The friar is still in the garden, now seated on a stool, his hands clasped around a steaming bowl. He sips, not hurried, not solemn, just present. He looks out across the rows of vegetables, across the buzzing of bees and the lazy fall of twilight, and he breathes. You step back into the warmth of the friary's hall and follow the dim light toward another small room, the scriptorium. Here, parchment is stretched and drying. A fresh page waits beside a quill. You imagine the word soon to be written, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a list of herbs, perhaps simply the date. Another day survived. Another record kept. The world outside the friary remains unpredictable, unkind. But in here, there is structure. A belief that caring, however imperfect, still mattered. You slip out through the same door you entered, back into the night-blued garden. The bell rings softly again, stirring a low vibration in the cool air. The friar lifts his head and gives you the faintest nod, as if to say, "We keep going." You step away from the cloister garden as twilight deepens into a soft and velvety blue. The stones beneath your feet seem to exhale warmth, having absorbed the last of the day's sun. A breeze stirs gently, and with it comes the faint scent of damp wool, wood smoke, and something earthy, mushrooms, perhaps, or the unmistakable smell of clay walls and cool air. You're walking now through a small village just beyond the friary walls. It's quieter than it should be. Fewer footsteps, fewer voices. But life, stubborn and strange, continues. You pass a cluster of half-timbered homes, narrow, bowed from years of standing, their thatched roofs in varying states of repair. Behind shuttered windows, someone is humming, maybe kneading bread or patching a child's tunic. You can't quite make out the tune, but the rhythm is familiar, slow and work-worn. In one doorway, a woman sits spinning wool by the fading light. Her fingers move in that hypnotic dance of pinch and pull, twist and release. The spindle whirls, gathering the thread like an old secret. This is what daily life looked like for most during the plague. Not panicked crowds or dramatic farewells, but quiet endurance. You duck into a cottage, don't worry, they won't see you, and observe a family gathered around a low table. The fire is small but enough. A pot of pottage simmers, some root vegetables, a bone for flavor, and wild herbs from the hedgerow. Not glamorous, but nourishing. One child stirs it with a wooden spoon nearly as long as his arm, grinning at the smell. The father carefully scrapes a bit of beeswax into the cracks of the window frame, trying to keep out the draft. The mother picks knits from a daughter's hair with a carved comb, the sort of mundane task that continues regardless of pandemics or plagues. There's a rhythm to it, a resilience in the routine. Food was a daily concern, of course. With so many laborers lost to the plague, crops went unharvested, livestock unattended. Fields once full of barley and rye sat fallow, and bread became scarce in some places. But those who survived found ways to adapt. Bartering replaced coin. Mushroom gathering became almost an art. And if you were clever, or desperate, you might thicken soup with acorns, or brew ale from roots and nettles. Children still played, in their own way. You pass a yard where 3 of them chase one another with sticks, giggling. One has a crude wooden horse tucked under his arm, the paint faded to pale hints of red and blue. Play didn't disappear, it just grew quieter. You watch them weave around a pile of chopped wood, their laughter rising like startled birds into the dusk, and yes, there were small pleasures too. A woman sits beside a window plucking at a lute with stiff fingers. She hums a tune not meant for performance, just a soft lullaby to herself, perhaps. Music, no matter how out of tune, had the power to stitch comfort into the ragged edges of a day. You move into the town square now, where once there might have been a market. Now it's sparsely dotted with merchants, each set up at least a good pike's length from the next. A man sells onions from a cart. Another, wrapped in a cloak too fine for his muddy boots, peddles soap and spices from a cracked chest. Nearby, a barber surgeon, noticeably underattended, leans against his shuttered stall, sharpening a blade. He looks bored, not menacing. Truthfully, he probably hasn't had much custom lately. Folks preferred home remedies to bloodletting when push came to plague. You don't blame them. You watch as a young girl approaches with a small basket and barters for a scrap of cheese. No coins change hands, just a promise of firewood delivered tomorrow. It's a simple transaction, but one that means soup tonight, and maybe, if they're lucky, dreams that come easier. A dog lies curled by the corner of a building, ribs visible but tail still thumping slowly when a passerby offers a scrap. Even in this world of scarcity, kindness remains a kind of currency. Further down the path, you hear a cough, not harsh, not urgent, but a reminder. A man sits by a closed door, bundled in layered cloaks. He holds a pouch of dried chamomile, occasionally raising it to his nose. For some, that was the only medicine available. The scent of flowers, and hope, above all this daily activity, you notice the quiet labor of survival. Nothing heroic or grand. Just patching clothes, heating water, grinding grain, folding linens, tending fire. Over and over. In a time when even breathing near a stranger could carry risk. The act of caring for your household became its own kind of bravery. You walk past a chicken coop, the birds already roosting. A pig grunts softly from a pen. A cat eyes you from a windowsill, tail twitching in lazy loops. Life, in its most modest form, keeps going. You pass an elderly woman carrying a basket of rushes. She's headed for the church steps, where she'll lay them out for weaving. Some will be used for floor coverings. Others will line beds, or stuff shoes. Every task, no matter how small, was layered with meaning, another gesture against the unknown, and the church itself stands still in the growing darkness, its walls scarred by weather and history, its bells silent tonight. You peer inside through a narrow window. A candle burns on the altar, just one. But it's enough. You notice now how much of life here is guided by sound, the scrape of ladles, the clink of wooden bowls, the rustle of rushes, the occasional clatter of a fallen pot. The silence of morning is different. You'd know it if you heard it. But not tonight. Tonight, there is motion, and meals, and murmurs. A young boy runs past with a carved whistle tied to his belt, a wooden toy spinning behind him on a string. He doesn't notice you, of course. But you smile at the sight, and as the village settles into sleep, one window at a time dimming behind shutters, you realize that this patchwork of daily rituals and cautious joy, is what survival looked like. Not miracles. Not bold heroes. Just people, doing what they could, with what little they had. You step away from the square now, following the path as it turns back toward the fields. The air smells of tilled earth and distant ash, and somewhere, just faintly, you hear someone singing again. The wind sighs gently over the furrows as you walk beyond the village, your feet brushing the soft ridges of freshly turned soil. You feel it now, how time itself has slowed. Days blending into one another, marked not by grand events but by the small triumphs of staying fed, warm, and well. Just past the tree lean, there's a lone figure working in the failing light. A woman, stooped with age, tying up bundles of lavender and rosemary. She hangs them on a line, their silvery leaves rustling faintly. They aren't for eating. No, these are meant to hang in doorways, to be sewn into pouches, to be tucked under pillows. Not because they work, but because they might. Because belief, in the right measure, can be as sustaining as food. Her hands are weathered, wrists wrapped in linen, and she hums as she works. You notice how rhythmic it is, the bundling, the knotting, the hanging. Like prayer. Like habit. Like a thread tying her to all the others who once did this too. In times like these, medical knowledge was a strange patchwork of folk wisdom, superstition, and the odd flash of real insight. You might treat a fever with a boiled root one day, and with a frog tied to the throat the next. And yet, people tried. They tried everything. In a nearby cottage, you find a man stirring a bubbling concoction in a wide copper pot. He leans close, eyes narrowed, sniffing like a curious dog. The mixture is thick and dark, flecked with mustard seeds and steeped garlic. This is a thieves' vinegar, or so the tale goes, made by criminals who robbed plague victims without getting sick. Historians still argue whether this vinegar actually worked, or whether the story itself was the true tonic, keeping fear at bay with a dash of folklore and vinegar's sharp sting. You ease along a path to a healer's hut, not a university-trained physician, but a local woman known for her tonics and salves. She's in her 50s, and her house smells like 10 kinds of bark. Her shelves are crammed with jars, marigold petals, dried nettle, powdered oyster shell. She mutters to herself, slicing a root into thin wafers. It might be angelica, or maybe just parsnip. You're not sure, and neither is she, frankly. But the point is not certainty, it's motion, ritual, care. On her table is a bundle of papers, carefully kept notes in a script that zigzags like ivy. Recipes, charms, observations. You can see where she's crossed things out, added arrows, adjusted her guesses. Science and magic still sleep in the same bed here, and it's hard to say who snores louder. Outside, someone leaves a bundle at her doorstep, half a loaf of bread and a twist of wool. Payment, maybe. Or thanks, and it wasn't just herbs and poultices. You recall another custom now, a curious one. Doctors and laypeople alike believed in balancing the body's humors. You've heard of this, surely? Black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. If you were too hot, or melancholy, or gassy, yes, even that, you needed to be rebalanced. So, out came the leeches. Or the lancets. Or, if you were lucky, just a warm cup of wormwood tea and a nap. You pass a village apothecary, a small shop marked by a painted sign of a mortar and pestle. Inside, the shelves bow under jars of colored powders and dried roots. The apothecary himself is dozing at his desk, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. Even healers get tired. Above him, on a high shelf, you notice a book, an old one. The pages are stained, the leather binding cracked. Inside might be cures copied from ancient Arabic manuscripts, or maybe just his grandmother's chicken soup recipe in Latin. But it's sacred, all the same. Further down the lane, you visit a home where a child is feverish. The mother presses a cloth soaked in chamomile and sage water to his forehead. She speaks softly, singing an old lullaby under her breath. In the corner, a priest stands quietly, whispering a prayer. You see no judgment in his eyes, just fatigue, and duty. And what about those so-called plague doctors? The ones in the bird-like masks, with their beaked noses stuffed full of herbs and flowers? One stands now at the edge of a courtyard, still as a statue. His long cloak flutters slightly in the wind. He looks fearsome, but he's not much more protected than anyone else. His tools clink at his belt, wooden stick, dried orange peel. A vial of turpentine. The mask hides everything, fear, fatigue, perhaps even compassion. People would cross the street to avoid him, though some still clung to the idea that he brought healing. Truthfully, he often arrived too late, but his presence offered something strange and necessary, a symbol that someone was still watching, still trying. You walk beside a stream now, where watercress grows in shaggy green clumps. A woman fills a bucket and adds a drop of vinegar, precaution, not science. You nod, impressed. Even if the vinegar does nothing, it means she hasn't given up. Nearby, a man grinds dried apple skin with cloves and fennel. He places it in a pouch tied with twine, then tucks it under his tunic. The smell is sweet and strange, an attempt to purify the air. Another hopes the smoke of juniper branches will clear his lungs. Yet another thinks the smoke of burning clothes will do the trick. It won't. But the fire gives light, and warmth, and a small illusion of control. In a small alley, two women whisper over a basin of steaming herbs. One reads aloud from a parchment, a blessing, a charm. a folk cure passed down from grandmothers long dead. Their hands tremble, but their eyes are steady. They will continue this ritual again tomorrow. And the next day. Because that's what you do. Somewhere above, a bell tolls, not for death this time, but for vespers. A quiet call to prayer. To pause. To breathe. You sit for a moment near a stone wall overgrown with ivy, letting the scents swirl around you: lavender, vinegar, old cloth, wood smoke, earth. It is not a pleasant perfume, but it's real. Honest. It smells like trying, and you begin to understand that healing, in this time, was not just about cures. It was about gestures. About lighting candles, whispering names, steeping herbs, trusting old wives' tales, and keeping your door swept. You kept doing these things because stopping meant surrender. And surrender, even in a world this fragile, felt worse than illness. You leave the village behind and follow a narrow dirt track into the wild woods where the sounds of civilization grow distant. Here, nature is a dense, tangled companion, its shadows long and soft beneath a canopy of leaves. It's easy to imagine the world before plagues, before cities, before fear turned neighbors into strangers. As you move deeper, you find the remains of a small campfire, cold now, but the faint scent of smoke lingers. Nearby, a pile of clay shards and broken cooking pots lies half buried in moss. These were the remnants of those who fled the village, those who sought refuge from the invisible enemy. But the forest offered little sanctuary, and even here, survival was a delicate balance between hope and despair. You come across a narrow stream, its waters clear and cold. It winds through the trees like a silver thread, promising life and renewal. People sought water often, knowing it was a precious resource, yet unsure if it could bring safety or sickness. Some believed pure running water might wash away the plague's stain. Others feared it carried the infection itself. Historians still argue whether waterborne transmission played any role at all during this time, a reminder that uncertainty shadowed every corner of daily life. You settle on a mossy bank, listening to the forest's quiet symphony, leaves rustling, birds chirping, distant woodpecker taps. You breathe in the cool air, tinged with pine and damp earth. And imagine the thoughts of those who lived centuries ago, trying to reconcile faith with fear. In these woods, away from the crowds, some sought healing in the embrace of nature. They gathered herbs and roots, yarrow, sage, nettle, and fashioned poultices and teas. Some whispered prayers to ancient spirits, hoping for mercy. The forest was both a refuge and a reminder of mortality. As dusk falls, you notice the soft glow of lanterns flickering in the distance. A small group approaches, carrying baskets filled with food and medicines. They move quietly, respectful of the night and the sick. These are the helpers, the healers, the midwives, the neighbors who dared to reach out. You watch as they kneel beside a frail figure wrapped in blankets, offering bread and broth. Their voices are gentle, a soothing murmur against the harshness of illness. In their presence, the weight of loneliness lightens, if only for a moment. The helpers move on, their footsteps muffled by the forest floor. You remain, feeling the cool night settle around you. The stars begin to twinkle overhead. Distant and indifferent to human woes, you rise, brushing moss from your clothes, and head back toward the village. The journey through darkness mirrors the uncertainty of the times, a slow, deliberate passage through fear, hope, and resilience. As you walk, you reflect on the quiet courage of those who lived through the plague. Not the heroes of legend, but ordinary people, families, neighbors, strangers, who faced an unseen enemy with whatever means they had. Their story is one of survival, marked by small acts of kindness and the enduring rhythms of daily life. The forest fades behind you, replaced by the soft glow of candlelight and the comforting murmur of evening prayers. You step inside, the door closing gently behind you, and feel the warmth of the hearth and the steady heartbeat of home. You find yourself back in the village just as the twilight deepens, casting long shadows over cobblestones worn smooth by countless footsteps. The air is cooler now, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint smoke of hearth fires. People move slowly through the lanes, their faces weary but determined. The day's work is done, but the day's worries linger. As you stroll past a small bakery, you catch the aroma of freshly baked bread, yeasty, warm, and inviting. This simple comfort was a precious balm during the plague years. Food was scarce, and what was available often stretched the limits of creativity. Villagers turned to foraging wild greens and roots, drying herbs, and making stews from whatever was left. Bread, when it could be had, was treasured not just for nourishment but for its comforting routine. Inside the bakery's window, a basket holds strange shapes of bread dusted with flour, little loaves shaped like animals and crosses. These were called plague breads, baked with the hope that their shapes might bring protection. Sometimes, they contained hidden herbs or small charms tucked inside the dough. You move on and past the smithy, where the steady ring of hammer on anvil punctuates the evening air. The smith is busy repairing tools and horseshoes, essential work that keeps the village functioning. It's hard to imagine the smith's trade without animals to care for or fields to till. But the wheels of life turn, even slowly. Nearby, a group of children play quietly, their laughter soft as they chase each other around a well. Their games are simple: tag, hide and seek, skipping stones, but even in the shadow of the plague, childhood persists. Their innocence is a small rebellion against the darkness. You pause beside the village well, watching as a woman lowers a bucket into the cool water. Wells were lifelines, places where the community gathered despite the risks. The water was fresh and cold, but its purity was a subject of debate and superstition. A few steps away, a man is scribbling notes in a small book, his fingers stained with ink. He is a chronicler, one of the few who attempt to capture the events unfolding around them. His records are not grand histories but snapshots, names, dates, symptoms, and stories of survival. These notes might one day help others understand what happened here. Your path leads you to the village chapel, where a candle flickers softly behind stained glass. The priest is preparing for evening prayers, his voice low and steady as he chants. Religion provided solace and structure during the plague. The church was a sanctuary, a place to seek meaning when medicine failed. You notice a woman sitting quietly on a bench outside the chapel, her hands folded in prayer. She wears a simple dress, her hair covered with a worn shawl. Her eyes are closed, her breath steady. Around her neck hangs a small wooden cross, an amulet against despair. Nearby, a group of elders gather beneath an ancient oak. They speak in hushed tones about the changes the plague has wrought, the empty houses, the lost neighbors, the new customs that have taken root. They share stories. Wisdom passed down through generations, reminding one another that life endures, even after great loss. As night deepens, lanterns are lit along the streets, casting a gentle glow that softens the edges of the darkness. You walk slowly, absorbing the quiet resilience of the village. Despite everything, the community holds together, bound by shared grief and hope. The sounds of evening settle around you, the distant bark of a dog, the murmur of voices, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It's a lullaby of sorts, a reminder that even in the hardest times, life continues in small, tender ways. You find a quiet spot beneath the stars and sit, letting the gentle night wrap around you. The village, with all its struggles and stories, feels like a living thing, fragile yet unyielding, a testament to human endurance. The night deepens, and you find yourself drawn toward the edge of the village once more, where the cobblestones give way to packed earth and scattered leaves. Here, the sounds soften, footsteps become whispers, and the world feels quieter, slower, as if holding its breath. You pass a cluster of small homes, their windows glowing faintly with candlelight. Inside, families gather close, sharing what little food remains and stories from better times. These moments are fragile, stitched together with hope and memory. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the familiar strange and beautiful. You pause at one door, where a woman rocks a sleeping child. Her movements are gentle, almost hypnotic, and the child's soft breaths rise and fall in time with the slow creak of the wooden floor. She hums an old lullaby, one that has traveled through generations, its melody soothing enough to calm even the most restless mind. The song speaks of peace and protection, a quiet promise that the night will pass. Outside, the wind carries a faint scent of rosemary and sage, herbs believed to cleanse the air and keep spirits safe. You remember how these plants were woven into garlands and hung above doorways, a silent shield against unseen dangers. The boundaries between medicine, magic, and faith blur in these times, and sometimes it's hard to tell where one ends and another begins. The village cemetery lies just beyond the last cluster of houses, a small, overgrown patch where weathered stones lean like tired sentinels. You walk slowly among them, reading names worn smooth by time. Each stone marks a life, a story cut short or stretched long through struggle. A soft rustling nearby draws your attention to a lone figure tending a grave by lantern light. An elderly man, his back bent, his hands steady despite years of labor. He places a fresh sprig of lavender on the earth, a gesture of remembrance and love. The quiet ritual reminds you that grief is not just sorrow but also a connection, a way to keep those who've passed close to the living. You think about how communities handled death during the plague. Mass graves were common in cities, but here in the village, families tried to maintain dignity, burying their own when they could. The risk was great, but the act of laying someone to rest was vital, a final kindness, a way to say goodbye. Your thoughts drift to the healers and caregivers who, despite their fear, continued their work. Their bravery was quiet, unheralded. They moved from house to house, offering comfort, tending wounds, whispering prayers. Their tools were simple: cloth bandages, herbal remedies, and a steady hand. You imagine the toll on these caregivers, their exhaustion deep and constant. Many fell ill themselves, yet still, they rose each day to do what they could. Their stories are woven into the fabric of this time, threads of compassion in a tapestry of hardship. As the night grows colder, you find a bench beneath a gnarled tree, its branches stretching like arms toward the sky. You sit, feeling the rough bark against your back, the cool air brushing your skin. The stars overhead twinkle softly, indifferent yet somehow comforting. In this stillness, you sense the resilience of those who lived through the plague, not just in their survival, but in their capacity to love, to care, and to remember. The world was dark, yes, but within that darkness, small lights burned steadily. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of night, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, wash over you. In this quiet, you find a strange peace, a gentle reminder that even in the most trying times, life holds moments of grace. As dawn begins to hint at its arrival, you follow a narrow path leading toward the fields just beyond the village edge. The early morning air is crisp, touched with the faint scent of dew and earth waking from sleep. The sky softens from deep blue to pale lavender, promising a new day with its quiet, steady rhythm. The fields stretch wide and open, dotted with patches of wildflowers and tall grasses swaying gently in the breeze. Here, life feels expansive, unconfined by walls or fear. For many, the fields were a place of work, of renewal, and sometimes of refuge. During the plague, those who could fled to the countryside, hoping the open air and isolation might offer protection. You notice the soft hum of insects beginning their morning chorus, the gentle buzz of bees, the chirp of crickets. These sounds blend with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds, creating a natural symphony that eases the mind. It's a reminder that nature, indifferent yet enduring, continues its cycle regardless of human suffering. You pause by a small garden tended by an elderly woman. She is bent over rows of herbs, thyme, lavender, rosemary, carefully watering and tending them with a practiced hand. Her face is lined with years, her eyes bright despite the hardships she's endured. This garden is her sanctuary, a place where she cultivates not just plants but hope. Her herbs are more than decoration, they are medicine, tradition, and comfort. People believed in the healing powers of plants, some for body, some for spirit. Lavender, for instance, was thought to calm nerves and ease restless nights, while rosemary was said to sharpen memory and guard against illness. You can almost imagine the soft scent mingling with morning air, a subtle balm for weary souls. Nearby, a group of villagers work together to plant seeds for the coming season. Their movements are slow but deliberate, each gesture a small act of faith in the future. The soil feels cool and rich beneath their hands, promising growth despite the shadows cast by recent losses. You watch as a young man pauses to rest, wiping sweat from his brow. His gaze lingers on the horizon where the rising sun spills golden light across the fields. There's a quiet determination in his posture, a silent vow to rebuild, to carry on. As you wander, you think about the rhythms of daily life during the plague. Work was difficult, often interrupted by illness or grief, but essential. Food had to be grown. Animals tended, homes maintained. These tasks, repetitive and grounding, helped anchor people amid uncertainty. You recall stories of community feasts held after harvests, moments when neighbors came together to share food, stories, and laughter. Such gatherings were precious, reminders of shared humanity and resilience. Historians still argue whether rural isolation truly slowed the plague's spread or simply delayed its arrival. But in these fields, you sense a slower pace of life, a steadiness that offers solace and strength. The morning sun climbs higher, warming the earth and brightening the world. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with fresh air scented by herbs and soil. Feeling a gentle peace settle over you, you begin your walk back toward the village, carrying with you the quiet hope of these fields, the promise of renewal, growth, and a future shaped by perseverance. You step from the open fields back into the hush of the village just as twilight begins to cool in the gutters and nestle in doorways. The world around you feels transformed, softer in the fading light, as though the plague's harsh edges have been gently sanded smooth by time and memory. You walk slowly, letting your footsteps echo in the empty lanes, each click of your boots a quiet punctuation in the evening calm. Here and there, homes glow with lantern light, windows framed by bundles of dried herbs and fresh wildflowers. A hush falls over the streets, broken only by the distant lowing of a goat or the rustle of a cat slipping along a fence. You pause beneath an archway where children once carved their initials beside symbols for luck, stars, crosses, spirals. In their innocence, they marked the world as theirs, even when it threatened to slip away. You glide past the blacksmith's closed shop, its anvil silent, tools hung like dormant guardians against the wall. The smith's great bellows rest empty, and you can almost imagine the echoes of hammer meeting iron, each strike a heartbeat in the life of the town. He's long since gone to bed, exhausted by days of repair, nails for coffins, horseshoes for carts, hinges for doors shut against fear. Across the square, the ruined fountain stands like a vessel waiting to be filled again. Its lion-carved face is still wistful, and moss patterns curl around its edges. You run a fingertip across the stone, feeling the grooves worn by centuries of water and fingertips seeking comfort. The fountain once gurgled with life, now it holds only memory, yet even memory can sustain you when other wells run dry. You drift toward the chapel at the village's heart. Its heavy doors are ajar, spilling warm light onto the flagstones. Inside, the altar is draped in a cloth embroidered with tiny crosses and tiny names, some scratched in haste, some stitched in hope. A single candle burns, its flame steady in the soft draft. The priest stands in quiet vigil, his voice a low murmur as he reads a list of the departed. Historians still argue whether these daily memorials helped grieving families find peace or simply prolonged their sorrow, but tonight, as you stand in the flickering glow, you sense that remembrance itself is its own kind of healing. You step forward, kneel on the cold stone, and close your eyes. You let the hush settle over you, an intimate tapestry of breath, dripped candle wax, and whispered prayers. You feel the skin of your hands warm against the cool floor, and for an instant you imagine all those who knelt here before you, mothers clutching shawls, fathers bowing heads, children offering prayers in trembling voices. You are part of this endless stream now, your presence woven into the chapel's history. Rising, you leave the chapel and wander back through lanes where lanterns hang like watchful eyes. A cat crosses your path, soft-footed and calm, as if to guide you home. You follow its silent steps until you arrive at the door of the cottage where you began your journey through this plague-shadowed town. You pause outside, feeling the warmth of hearth and community gathering around you like a familiar cloak. The door is open, just enough to let in the night air and a half-whisper of laughter from within. You step inside and find the shared table set with a simple meal, pottage, fresh bread, cool water. A single bowl is empty, yours, waiting to be filled. You take your place and sit, letting the chair creak under you. Faces greet you, neighbors, survivors, ghosts of memory and hope entwined. No words are needed, here, companionship alone speaks volumes. A hand reaches across the table to rest lightly on yours, a gesture older than language, a promise that even after loss, you will not walk alone. Outside, the night deepens. The village settles into sleep in waves, first the children, then the animals, then the last whispers of conversation. Sleep comes softly, like a hush from heaven, and you close your eyes in this room warmed by presence and remembrance. You drift toward bed as a hush falls over the room. The lamplight dims, softened by shadows that dance across the walls like memories settling into place. It's in these final moments that the world feels most tender, each breath a quiet anchor, each heartbeat a gentle lullaby. Outside, the night holds its breath. A faint breeze stirs chimes at a distant window, their song like distant bells calling you inward. You nestle beneath the covers, the fabric warm against your skin, familiar in its softness. Your mind glides over the day's journey, the shrouded streets, the hushed prayers, the fields of renewal, and the simple acts of care that tethered lives together. Let go now of worry. Picture the stars overhead, bright, indifferent, and welcoming. Imagine the lantern light glow shifting to the flicker of dreams, guiding you into softer realms. Recall the scent of lavender and sage, the whisper of leaves, the echo of a child's lullaby, and let these sensory threads weave a tapestry of calm. The plague's shadow may linger in stories, but here, in the quiet of sleep, you hold only hope. Rest in that hope. Sleep in its gentle arms. Tomorrow, you'll wake again to the world's rhythm, bathed in morning light, renewed by the same rituals of kindness and memory that saw you through. Good night, traveler. Let the soft breath of history rock you as you drift into dreams. Wrapped in the quiet assurance that though loss touches every soul, the whisper of human resilience outlasts even the darkest nights.